So after the state of the game, and they talked about what updates they were going to be bringing with TU11, all the gear and the summit mode that was actually originally they were just calling skyscraper. After all this stuff, I wanted to make a video of just talking about it, but of course, I kind of lost interest, and then of course my internet died, right before the PTS, so I couldn't really even release anything. But that idea just kind of faded. I lost interest in just really talking about it. And then I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just turn it into a video talking about the imbalance with, a lot of the stats and with a lot of the skills. And of course, again, I lost interest. And this is pretty much due to the fact that I'm only doing YouTube for the Division, right? I'm not here, trying to become PewDiePie, right? I'm not here trying to become, the next greatest YouTuber. Right? I don't really care about YouTube. I care about the game. And this kind of brings up a funny point to me where, last week I had somebody in the comment section talk about how, it's YouTubers who are ruining the game again, and this made me think about Division 1 where, they're talking about YouTubers ruining the game on like a daily basis. I've been against pretty much everything that they've done. I have said this numerous times that, the changes that they're going to do are going to be bad for the game. I've expressed this in many different ways. And of course, before even TU7 came out, this is back in like January, February, when they were talking about the new stat system for the gear, I was saying, this is going to be bad. This is not going to work. This is not going to make players happy. It's not going to feel rewarding. It's not going to feel good. It's not going to increase build diversity. Well, guess what? It finally, kicked in with players eventually, slowly, after, TU8, after TU9, and then, of course, TU10, when players just started complaining about the rainbow loot that had been there the entire time. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, is it me? Is it YouTubers that are actually ruining the game, or is it really just players that are ruining the game? It's just aggravating. I mean, look, there are some bad YouTubers, but at the same time, we are not responsible for all of the stupidity that is going into the game. Personally, I am not responsible for any of the stupidity that has gone into the game. So I really don't understand how I could be ruining it. But this just kind of fits into this video perfectly because, there's plenty of things that I would have done differently. If I was in charge of what the changes were going to be, if I was, redesigning the systems, if I was doing the stuff to actually make a balanced game, make a fun game, make a game that worked and did not just kind of torture its players, I think overall that the game would be in a lot better state. And now honestly, if you watch my channel, if you pay attention to my videos, you know that I have no problem being a DPS build. I prefer being a skill build because that's just what I find fun. But again, I don't have a problem being a tank build either. I can be a tank, I can be DPS, I can be a skill build. I can do all of those in PvP. I can do all of those in PvE. I'm not just some random guy who only plays one playstyle and complains about everything else. I pretty much have one of the most balanced views on the entire spectrum of the game that is, mentally possible, at least, for the most part. I mean, obviously I still have some bias towards certain things, but even if I don't like something, I understand that it has a place in the game. So with that in mind, I actually just want to use some of the stuff that I was working on just because, at this point, I don't think there's really ever going to be a reason why I will produce a future video on this stuff. So I just figured, what? Hey, I have it. I've been working on it. I might as well just use what I have. Now what you're looking at here is just pretty much all of the generic stats that are in the game. Now this doesn't have stats that are, specific to named gear, and it doesn't have stats that are, pretty much only found on one single brand set or one single gear set. I didn't really include gear set bonuses. But you can see here just looking quickly at a few of them, skill duration, normally that's supposed to be 20%, but for some reason on mods it's only 10. Skill haste, skill repair on your shade watch, those have been reduced to 10%. Obviously haste is usually 12 and repair is usually 20. But of course on the shade watch, chance has been increased to 10% from 6. Damage has been increased to 20% from 12. Headshot damage has been increased to 20% from 10. And of course, just looking at the actual brand set bonuses themselves, crit chance, crit damage, and headshot damage are again improved over their normal rolls. Another thing that I found interesting was just the core system itself. Obviously you have the blue, red, and yellow cores, right? You've got skill tier, you've got armor, and you have weapon damage. Now if you look at it, yellow rolls, skill tier, is the only one that you can't actually get on your gear. You can get weapon damage, so basically adding cores from your rolls. You can get total armor, again, basically adding cores to your rolls. Crit chance, crit damage, headshot damage can basically be gained by all sources in this game. So every piece of gear can roll with crit chance, crit damage, and headshot damage. You can get brand sets that roll all of these. You can basically get this on your Shade Watch. You can use these on your mods. With skills, and to the same extent with armor, there's a lot less investment that you can actually make into your chosen field, right? I mean, if you are a tank, you are designed to reduce the amount of damage or, take more damage than is possible from all other players. If you are a skill build, you are designed to do the most amount of damage with a skill possible. But the common feature here is that generally across the board, you can't invest into full skill damage or status effects or, whatever all you want. There are not multiple sources for you to get this damage, and you can't, you can't build this damage like you can for weapons. And honestly, that kind of annoys me in the game, where if you go back to Division 1, it was more fair. It was generally equal across the board with how the system worked. Now, if we actually look at the cores themselves, right? With weapon damage, each core is 15%. And you can have 6 cores, so you can get that 90%. And there's no cap on this, meaning that, each 15% weapon damage roll that you get, the 15% that you get from the specialization, the 10% that you get from the shade, the 20% that you can get from the different brand sets, and even, I guess, the gear sets. But I mean, you can basically get easily 60% extra. So you can get 4 cores, meaning that your red build can have the equivalent of 10 red cores. Now with armor, it's obviously a little bit different just because they have a very small window of where you can actually get total armor from. But basically the way that it ends up breaking down is if you actually have 6 maxed out cores, so the 170k armor on each roll, every 9.88% of total armor that you add is actually an additional core. So if you maxed out your brand sets and your shade, you could generally have around 8.5 blue cores. Now, of course, as I like to call it, the toilet tier, which, just skill tier, the tier system, I hate it. I've expressed that numerous times. It's just boring. But the thing with tiers is you can only have 6. You can never go over. There is no benefit to having more than 6. There is no way to actually get over 6, and it is just pretty much a dead system once you get to 6. Meaning that there is no point in expanding your skill, build. You just have to basically go into other stats at that point. And of course, we saw with some of the new gear, they're adding the ability to gain skill tiers from it, which is going to just further reduce the effectiveness of skill builds because other builds are just going to be able to have 3 yellow cores for pretty much no investment into them. And that's stupid. But I mean, you could say that, well, skill builds are going to have the opportunity to invest into other things. Yeah, that's great, but that's not what a skill build is. If I wanted to be a full max, glass cannon weapon damage build, I can do that. And I will have 10 red cores doing it. If I wanted to be a full glass cannon yellow build, you can't do it. You can't invest that much into it because there aren't stats that are going to always give you damage for your skill class. So if I was using the turret and the drone, I can go with skill damage on some of my stuff, but my mods, they're not going to contribute to my damage. Half of my rolls are not going to contribute to my damage. Some of my brands are not going to contribute to my damage. Whereas with weapon damage, it's basically just constantly. There are options that I can use for every single piece on weapon damage to give me more weapon damage. Now, if you actually look at it and actually try to, compare some builds that you have. Now, these are just some that I've based mine off of. Some builds where I've achieved kind of the pinnacle of max blue, max red, max yellow. And these are kind of the numbers that I would get from them if I basically just maxed them out. So I artificially gave myself max rolls and just calculated from there. Now, with weapon damage, you can see based on the calculations of all these multiplicative bonuses that I'm getting, I can get over 1,000% increase to my base damage. Meaning that if I was a skill build, I would be shooting an enemy for about 50k damage. Whereas if I was a full max weapon damage build, I'm going to be shooting them for an average of 525,000. So basically a 10 times increase over my base damage. Now if you look at armor, it's a little bit unfair. Obviously they've tried to invest into different stats with armor, and that just doesn't really work out too well. But basically, you can get, 320% increase to your total armor as an armor build, which this kind of explains why armor in PvE is kind of really a crappy stat, because it's nowhere near the increase that you can get from the actual damage that is done to you. And then, of course, looking at the actual skill tiers itself, even with max investments, I'm not even talking about like a usable build at this point. I'm talking about putting in the most powerful stuff that you could possibly get in the game, just so you could have as much damage as possible. Meaning that you are just a super squishy, almost worthless on the battlefield kind of build. You get tickled funny and you fall over. With that kind of build, with the drone and turret, the most you can get is really like an 820% increase from both of those. So basically, if you are shooting at the enemy, if you are having your drone and your turret shoot at the exact same enemy, and that enemy is not moving, just so basically every bullet can actually hit the enemy, and you don't have to worry about misses from the inaccurate turret or drone, you're still going to do less damage than a full weapon damage build. And of course, what I would consider the greatest stupidity in the Division 2 skill tier system is the overcharge mechanic, which isn't even usable in PvP, so that means anything that actually gives you overcharge is completely worthless. And the fact that it's really just not even a good system. I mean, the bonus that you get from it can be nice, but at the same time, it's like 15 seconds. And investing a lot of your stats just so you can get overcharge, 2 or 3 times, means that generally you are actually going to be doing less damage than you would if you just invested into your normal skill damage. So the overcharge itself doesn't really have any benefit. I mean, some of the status effects, yeah, it might be nice to overcharge them. But again, something like the Eclipse protocol greatly overshadows the use of anything for a status effect build. Now, the simple reason that I can use to explain just why the stat system is bad is if you go back to Division 1, firearms, electronics, and stamina, those were your main investments. Those were your main sources of whatever stat you wanted. If you wanted a red build, you would go with firearms, right? That would give you the most bang for your buck on doing weapon damage. And the same thing with electronics for skill power, same thing with stamina for your health and your armor. With the Division 2's new system, the core system is just significantly weaker than the first game. And this has the follow-on effect of basically just making it mandatory that everything complements those roles. Otherwise, you're just not getting the benefit. You're not getting the maximized use of those stats. And because everything pretty much relies on multiplicative bonuses, it means that everything needs to be in line with these multiplicative bonuses for you to actually get the full potential. And if you saw my last video, of course, talking about the diminishing return system versus the exponential system and how that directly impacts the viability of a lot of hybrids. And for all intents and purposes, I do not consider a person with, 3 armor rolls and everything else a red roll a hybrid build. Now, of course, the easiest thing to point out with the system is just the actual design flaws themselves. If you have stats that are just terrible, that aren't used, that do not necessarily compete on an even playing field with stats that are predominantly the main choices of everyone, then it just doesn't make sense. Like they don't even serve a purpose for being there. They're very niche. They're not even good enough to actually be used fully in builds. I mean, no one is going to choose a explosive resistance reload speed build. It just doesn't make sense. They don't complement each other. They don't belong in the same categories as each other. They should not be taking up the same options as each other. Weapon damage, crit chance, crit damage, headshot damage are the main focuses of a red build. The only reason anybody would choose accuracy, stability, reload speed, or ammo cap is if they were additional options to choose from. Meaning you could choose accuracy, stability, reload speed, ammo cap, or you could choose the blue or yellow equivalents of those. If the choice is just, the main roles versus the secondary roles, you get a lot less build diversity. And this brings up the point that stats are only useful if they actually solve a basic need. If they don't solve anything, if they don't make it easier for the player to do something, they are useless. And in this case, most of these stats are useless. Now, ammo cap could be extremely useful to players if it wasn't for the fact that, ammo boxes are literally after every encounter in every single mission. It's just ridiculous. Why would you invest in ammo capacity when it's just everywhere? It doesn't even make sense. It's just stupid. I mean, the design of this game is in many ways stupid and self-limiting. And this goes for explosive resistance. I mean, explosive resistance was useful before Gear 2.0. But now, even with a maxed out full damage sticky bomb, you're still going to only be doing a tickle to a full max armor player. But of course, at the same time, if you are a maxed out sniper build, you could one-shot that same player. So it doesn't make sense. You have the ability to rapidly fire shots at a player, and you can one-shot him. But a skill build that has a cooldown of 12 or 15 seconds can only do like half of that damage. The other thing that this brings up is the accuracy stability issues with all weapons now. I mean, let's face it, if you go back into Division 1, use the base version of any weapon, it is going to be the least stable thing you've probably ever shot in any video game. And this worked because it required players to actually invest into accuracy and stability. You couldn't just pile on all of the crit chance, crit damage, headshot damage, whatever that you wanted, because you needed to actually be able to actually hit the enemy. Now, of course, this isn't directly the fault of the game, but it is a failure of the development team nonetheless. Now, the only real logical reason that I could even see for why this is because if you go back to Division 1, you would know that there was a huge problem, especially on console, with the peripheral attachments like the Cronus Max that you could equip and that you could use on your actual console. And that would basically have a program in it that would correct for whatever weapon you're using. So you would tell the Cronus Max what weapon you're using. You would go into your file system or whatever, go into the little pad on it, and you would select whatever program that you wanted to run. And if you were using a weapon like the AK, you would go down to the AK recoil pattern, and it would basically input on your controller. It would basically send an input like it was from your controller to the console that you are maneuvering it precisely how the AK is giving you recoil. So it would effectively remove all the recoil from the gun, basically just giving you a laser without any investment. And of course, the only way that they could think of countering this was to just pretty much remove all stability requirements from the game and make most weapons pretty much lasers themselves, just naturally. So it really removed all the need for stability and accuracy because the weapons didn't even need it anymore. And yes, there are still a few weapons that are a little bit jumpy, but it's not even close to what they were in Division 1. And again, when you do changes like this, it just removes the need for those different abilities. When you remove most of the skill damage, it removes the need for countering skill damage. And pretty much the key takeaway with this is, without properly developed stats, we see many issues arise in the game. And obviously the easy one to note, where it starts at, is that there are just some stats with no viable use. You're not going to use them. You're not going to equip them. You don't want them on your gear. And anything that has that is pretty much just an automatic delete. When you start limiting the amount of stats that players actually want to use, that are actually viable, that actually have a reason to exist, that's when you start getting into the best in slot meta builds. Everyone's just using this, and that's all you're going to use because that's the only thing that works. And then, then players start complaining about a lack of build diversity because everyone's using the same stupid stuff because everything else is worthless. And then, of course, the developers come in and try to, be Captain Save-A-Ho for their terrible system that they actually created, and they go through a bunch of balance changes that just never stop because they never get the balance right. But then, of course, that has the issue where players become confused with all these changes and all the hidden rules that they release that they don't really inform people about, the things that they change that they don't include in the patch notes that no one knows about until they test and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't working. This doesn't work right. This isn't the same way that it just was a day ago. And then, of course, that leads to blame being, just leveled across the entire game at certain areas, people not understanding what's the real issue, it's the developer's fault for this not working anymore, and it's just, this skill's crap, this thing's crap, this is unfair, whatever. Everything starts getting blamed, and no one really understands the true issue behind it. Why is all of a sudden it a problem now, and why are all these things now issues when this stuff wasn't even supposedly touched? And so that just is additional annoyance with the actual player base. Then, of course, that leads to constant updates to fix what was just fixed. And we know how that works out. The fixes never work. They're always constantly breaking something that they just fixed. And of course, this development cycle that's based on band-aids, not content, is detrimental to the game. When you're constantly redeveloping what you've already put out in the game, you don't have time to actually make new worthy additions to the game, which of course ends up, just compiling on all these issues, and you end up with a loss of the player base. You end up losing most of your player base because you've been focused on stupidity, you've been pushing out stupidity, you've been creating stupidity, and it's just this never-ending cycle of stupidity. TU11 is no different. TU11 is going to continue the stupidity. It is going to be a huge disappointment for many players who think this is going to be the last chance to save the game. Newsflash, it's not going to save the game. The skyscraper summit mode, as many people have already, discussed on their channels, as many people have already, found out from the PTS, it's going to be incredibly boring. It's going to be something that is just not replayable. Yeah, it's designed to be replayable in the fact that you can go from floor 61 to floor 71 and then back down to 61 to 71 again. It's Kinley Tower. It's frickin' Kinley Tower, guys. It's not going to be something interesting. You're going to get the exotic if you get to, floor 100, and you're never going to touch it again. And if you can't get to floor 100 or you can't get past it, it's going to be a dead mode to you eventually, because you're just going to be like, I don't want to play this. This is the same stupid, boring stuff that I've been doing for a month now, and I don't have the exotic yet. I don't care. Now, honestly, guys, I do suspect that they are working on Division 3 at this moment. I think they are working on the inner design of the actual game, the core content of the game. I think that's where they are at. That's pretty much the main reason why we are seeing, some of the people on the state of the game that we don't normally see on a day-to-day basis. This is why I think Bruce is pretty much in charge of whatever he's doing, because he's the one that's doing it. He's in charge of his area, and the other guys are in charge of their areas. Most of their former bosses are now working on a different project, and obviously we all know about Avatar. That's already announced. So why would Frederick Dylander be on an unannounced project at Massive if it wasn't a Division-based system? I'm pretty sure, almost without a shadow of a doubt, that Frederick Dylander is working on Division 3. While I honestly don't believe that there's any hope of saving Division 2. I mean, honestly, I think they should just work on Avatar right now. Just scrap this crap, work on Avatar, and maybe at least make that a decent game for somebody who's willing to play it. Because honestly, I think there's more hope in making Avatar a good game than there is in fixing anything in Division 2 at this point. So with that being said, I fully understand that the things that I talk about, the reasons that I give, are not going to have any effect on Division 2. And for those people that have the opinion that, well, it should just be better for the player, it should make the game more fun, it should make the game easier and more enjoyable. The fact is, that's what they've done. That's what they've been doing. That's what every change has been oriented towards, making the game more fun. And it hasn't worked. It does not work. It is not how you make a good game. You don't rate a movie or a book doing exactly what the reader wants you to do. You have to create a system that gives the player just enough to be interested, but you can't give them so much that they basically just don't even have to make choices, that they don't have to struggle with difficulty. Just making a game based on what's fun is a failure of design. It is a failure of development, and it is stupid. Honestly, it is the stupidest thing you can do in a video game. Making what is fun. What's fun for you may not be fun for me. And if you focus on what is fun, you end up getting a broken game. You end up getting Division 2. You end up getting a game that basically just casts out most of its player base because it is not fun. So the for fun build design theory does not work in actually making a game fun. It does not make a game better. Alright, I know that turned into a rant there, but thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.